Now, the next 7 years are not going to be easy ones in the Diocese of Sheffield. They're frankly not going to be easy ones in the Church of England generally. But God is not a God of scarcity. God is a God of abundance. The Holy Spirit is a spirit of abundance. The sufferings of Christ are abundant for us, and our consolation is abundant through Christ. It is in that spirit that I embarked on a process of consultation around the turn of the year to establish a new direction of travel for the next 7 years to 2025. I think by the time this strategy is mature and ready to become a policy, it will have been in gestation about 9 months, which is not a bad period of time for a gestation. Why 7 years to 2025? Well, for one thing, I am trying to signal continuity. I may be the new Bishop of Sheffield, but this is not year zero for the diocese. 2025 is the last date named in the suite of documents which currently encapsulates the strategy for the Diocese of Sheffield. So taking that date is a nod in the direction of continuity. And so is the fact that we are retaining that long, comprehensive vision statement for the diocese, which goes like this. The Diocese of Sheffield is called to grow a sustainable network of Christ-like, lively, and diverse Christian communities in every place, which are effective in making disciples and in seeking to transform our society and God's world. I've had to memorize it because that sentence is printed on the back of my business card and I could not afford to get them reprinted. But since that sentence was coined for this diocese, our circumstances have not improved. In fact, they've continued to deteriorate, and hence my characterization of the four-headed beast. I know that language doesn't work equally well for everybody, but I am determined that the realities should be known, and it's the best image I know. This is what we're up against, and things may get more difficult before they get easier. So I want a strategy, and I want a strategy which is realistic in the face of that beast. And in the peculiar settlement which is the Church of England, it will in effect be my strategy, my pulling on the levers which a diocesan bishop is able to pull. But as a matter of fact, I don't believe that the discernment of the Holy Spirit is given only to diocesan bishops. In fact, much as I value and have come to appreciate the wisdom of Bishop Peter, I have to say the discernment of the Spirit is not just given to bishops. The discernment of the Spirit is given to the whole people of God, not just to the bishop's senior staff, not even just the clergy, to the whole people of God. And in any case, at the risk of sounding cynical, there are many bad words that you could use to describe me, and I'm guessing that over time you will learn many of them. But cynical, I promise you, will never stick. I am a natural-born enthusiast, and that's that. But at the risk of sounding cynical, if a strategy is going to have any chance of landing, it requires ownership, and ownership requires engagement. So here you are. Most of you, I suspect, are not going to be engaging with this evolving strategy for the first time. In fact, it has been through so many iterations involving many of you over the course of the last 3 or 4 months that track changes has ceased to be a useful tool. But please bear with me one more time, and bear with me if you've been through pretty much precisely the same exercise as I'm about to ask you to engage with this afternoon. I have a rather limited imagination when it comes to getting your feedback, and this is the most effective way I've been able to come up with. Now, this document has gone already to a goodly number of PCCs, to deanery chapters, deanery synods, not all of them, diocesan synod, bishops' council. It has been already adapted and revised again and again and again. but it is also becoming mature. So before this conference, you were circulated with a 15-page version of the plan as it's emerging, and in yellow on your tables there should be a hard copy version in case you need to refer to it. You also have in blue a 2-page summary, and what I'm asking of you today, as I've been asking many different groups around the diocese previously, is to scribble on the blue paper. I want you please to find a pen and to scribble away. I want you to litter the blue paper with ticks to indicate approval, crosses to indicate, well, disapproval, I suppose, exclamation marks at moments when you find yourself excited by these proposals, question marks if you have concerns, write actual words if you like. Feel free to use smiley faces or emojis or emoticons. And at the end of this afternoon, we're going to collect up the blue papers. And I commit to reading prayerfully everyone, I told you I wasn't a cynic, before the proposed strategy is revised one last time before it goes to synod next month. The plan over the next 80 minutes or so, 75 minutes or so, is that various members of the bishop's senior staff are going to speak to the successive sections of the strategy, and then after each, you will have some time around your tables to chat to one another and to scribble. In addition to scribbling on the blue sheets, which will be collected in, could you also bear in mind the opportunity to write a question on the pads, which are also in the centre of each table. At the back of the room, by the bins, there are a pair of collecting boxes. If you would please like to put your questions in those collecting boxes, that will form a good deal of the plenary session on Thursday morning, when the senior staff team will share with me the responsibility of trying to respond to your questions. We will reserve the most tricky ones for Bishop Peter. On Thursday, we will be happy to respond to questions on any particular subject. The other obvious one is the agenda for mutual flourishing going forward. Write a question on the pad paper in the table, drop it in the boxes at the back. So, the renewed section we'll begin with in a moment. Dean Peter will speak to it. There will be 2 sections to the released strand of the paper, to which Malcolm, Christine and Bishop Peter will speak. Rejuvenated, likewise, 2 strands to which Heidi and I and Mark, as director of the parish support team, will speak. Archdeacon Steve doesn't get off the hook. He's going to chair the plenary session on Thursday morning. Dean Peter, over to you.
Thank you. In many ways, I think I've got the easiest element of the new vision to introduce, but it is new. And we're inviting everyone in the diocese to commit in a very intentional way to pray for the diocese and our mission every day. I'm sure many of us do this already, and the diocese is often included in Sunday intercessions in different parishes. Some of us use the diocesan prayer cycle, but we are asking for a new level of commitment here to pray for our shared life. And there's 3 particular elements to it. Firstly, we're asking people to pray the Lord's Prayer every day, thinking of the mission of the diocese. In a sense, this too is obvious. It's the pattern we've been given for prayer. You may not know that the research shows now that the distinctive thing about early Christian worship, immediately following the end of the New Testament, the distinctive thing about daily Christian worship was the use of the Lord's Prayer 3 times a day, in the morning, in the late afternoon, and at night. And this was because some of the first Christians interpreted the Lord's Prayer as fulfilling the Hebrew Bible command for 3 daily sacrifices. As Christians, we are freed from that law, and we share in a sacrifice which ends all of those sacrifices. But early Christians wanted to hallow the whole day, particularly by praying the Lord's Prayer. And this is what we're inviting everyone in the diocese to do. And with it, the diocesan vision prayer. We particularly hope that people who, because of their frailty or for any other reason, who find it hard to participate in some of our outward-looking mission, can still own this as a core part of what makes us a diocese. And then, I don't know whether you've been to Bishopsthorpe recently, but at various times during the day, someone rings absolutely enormous sort of dinner gong. Just remember, like the Rank films, like that. And the Archbishop asks that everyone falls silent for a minute to pray together. There is no gong big enough yet to ring throughout the diocese. And so we're inviting some people, ideally all of us, to commit to praying for the diocese, perhaps at 20:25, at 8:25 in the evening, or at some other hour that we might regularly be praying at 25 minutes past the hour. We're clear that it's only by nourishing a new sense of shared dependence on the Lord that we'll flourish. And that's why this is a core part of the vision. To enable this use of the Lord's Prayer and daily prayer at 2025 to sustain itself over the next 7 years, we're also asking each deanery to set up meetings specifically to pray for the diocese. And we'll also be doing that in the cathedral. I hope that every one of these meetings will be different, and a whole variety of spiritualities and traditions will be represented. The important thing is that we open ourselves to a new commitment to ask for God's blessing on us all. Now, we're going to have 7 or 8 minutes for you to reflect on that, and just want to ask you 1 or 2 questions particularly. Is this commitment you feel that you personally could share in? If you've concerns, let us know now on the forms. And is this something that you could commend to the community where you serve? We feel, and there's deep theological truth in this, the more we pray together, the more we open ourselves together to receiving from the Lord, the more effective our mission will be. Thank you. So now you've got some time to debate that.
Of the strategy. There are 2 strands to it, one negative, one positive. So first of all, Archdeacon Malcolm will come to speak about the negative strand, but also referring to the ABCD at the top of page 2. And then Bishop Peter and Christine will speak to the positive strand, and then there'll be time for you to revert to your tabletop discussions again.
Thank you, Bishop. As you're probably aware, if you've read the paper, this particular strand released is probably the least settled of the strands in the emerging strategy. And that's because in the course of the consultation process, I think the paper that you've got in front of you is version 9, if I've been counting up properly. But in the course of that consultation, 4 additional questions have arisen that require further reflection before we settle into the objectives for this strategy too strongly. I'll come on to outline those 4 areas briefly in a few minutes, but I would like to begin, as I've been asked, by highlighting the 2 main aspects to released that are more settled and focusing in on one of those. As the bishop's just mentioned, and you'll have read in your paper, one of those could be regarded as negative and the other as positive. And in a few minutes, Christine and Bishop Peter will outline the positive main aspect, and it's my job, naturally as an archdeacon, to begin with the negative one. And that one relates to the constraints that we often find ourselves confronting in the course of our ministry. I use the word constraint because these things become a problem when they get in the way of what we're really about in proclaiming and living the good news of life in Christ. We often celebrate Jesus' words in John 10, verse 10, "I came that they may have life and have it abundantly." And yet we can so easily find life sapped by legal admin, building demands, even our pastoral structures. Now, please, I'm not saying that these things amount to the thief who comes only to steal, kill, and destroy, but they can be a drain on us nevertheless. And so we have to be honest about this and ensure that our strategy is seeking, in as far as the law and practical considerations allow, to reduce those constraints. This will mean taking a radical approach towards our church buildings and parish structures that we've inherited, whilst of course recognising that as we do, we are treading on sensitive ground. It means continuing to rethink how we share resources across larger mission areas, mission partnerships, with the hope and intention of reducing the unnecessary duplication of officers and activities and releasing energy for new mission initiatives. I'm increasingly of the view that we probably have too many unsustainable small parish units, each having to maintain demanding buildings and meet the requirements of being a parish church with ever-decreasing resources. We need to be creative and courageous in breaking out of the parochial mindset to explore reorganising into larger mission units that are better resourced in order to engage in local mission differently but more effectively. We also need to recognise the important place that Church House will continue to have in supporting the released agenda. In particular, Church House will be seeking ways to further support clergy, parish churches, lay leaders and mission initiatives in meeting the growing demands of legal compliance in relation to safeguarding, data protection and the like. In a few minutes, you'll have the chance to discuss around tables perhaps what some of those negative concerns and constraints are in your context and to make some notes on your sheets. But before we do that, a few words about the 4 new questions that have emerged in the consultation. The first, and you'll see these listed on your blue sheets on the second side, the first concerns the burden of unreasonable expectations faced by our clergy and lay leaders. Leaders in this radical time of change for the Church of England are having to both sustain the inherited patterns of ministry whilst illustrating and moving into new patterns in mission. And that is a huge burden. If we do get this right, and by God's grace, we see the church once again flourishing with a renewed focus, I sometimes wonder whether our descendants in 200 to 300 years' time will look back on leaders of the church in this generation with immense thanksgiving. But even so, it is not good enough to simply accept that's the way it is and see some of our clergy and lay leaders become increasingly burdened to breaking point. The National Church is considering the issue of clergy well-being, and Bishop Peter is keen to introduce a pattern in this diocese that encourages stipendiary clergy to take 1 double day off in each month when no annual leave is being taken. Hear those words well, they're on your sheet, read them well. This is something that was introduced by the previous Bishop of Liverpool when I was serving in that diocese, and it had a significant effect on clergy morale and well-being. It's a simple change, but it enables more time to be spent focusing and recovering often. In addition, we want to encourage PCCs to review with their stipendiary clergy how their time and energy is being invested so they're increasingly being released to engage in apostolic forms of ministry as well as pastoral forms. The second question concerns how we might release the whole people of God to be engaged in the mission of God when the church is dispersed throughout the week as well as gathered. And that's the Setting God's People Free agenda, which Christine and Bishop Peter will speak about in a few minutes. The third question surrounds our finances as a diocese and how we might discern what God is calling us to do in the light of what we can afford. This may well lead to a review of the common fund system, but also a more realistic and open discussion about the direct link between funded posts, including stipendiary clergy, and common fund receipts. There is, as we've already heard, a continued downward trend in the amount that we're collecting year on year through the common fund, which, combined with reduced income from the church commissioners, means that there is likely to be a very real gap between the numbers of stipendiary clergy we would like to see in ministry across the diocese and the numbers we can actually afford to pay. And that brings a sharper focus to this strand of the strategy, especially in relation to the role of stipendiary clergy. But it also raises questions as to how we might, of course, reverse that common fund trend. And finally, but no less importantly, we've been reminded of our need to engage with all 5 of the Anglican Communion's marks of mission, and in particular with the final 3 marks which are underrepresented in the strategy so far. These concern the kingdom ministries of serving those in most need, challenging and transforming unjust and violent structures, and safeguarding the integrity of creation. The Board of Faith and Justice, with its associated working groups, is engaged in a breadth of activities through which we seek to be salt and light in society. And the growing network of parish salt and light link officers are making these connections in their local communities. But we need to do further thinking about how this is more fully incorporated into the strategy and life of the diocese. And so I'm going to hand over now for the second part of this to Christina Bishop Peter, and then I think we're going into discussion after both. Is that right?
As a diocese, we are continuing to prioritise the making of disciples and the growing of a discipleship culture across the diocese. And so when we speak about a generous and flourishing diocese, we hope it will be characterised by whole life discipleship. And it's whole life in 3 senses. For the whole of our lives, because it's a lifelong journey with God. By wholly giving of our lives to God, enabling by the Spirit of God to live those holy lives, and in the whole of our lives, wherever we find ourselves, to live as the people of God and to live as God would call us to. So for the whole of our lives, by wholly giving of our lives, and in the whole of our lives. And the second aspect to the release strategy is to liberate and maximise the untapped potential of individual disciples, of whole congregations, and our concentration of greatest resources. This is all on your blue sheet on the second page. And in our current situation, we really cannot afford to neglect the God-given gifts and resources that are available to us. So one of the things we're thinking about is how we might liberate the whole people of God. And so Bishop Peter's going to come and just say a little bit about that national report and our involvement with a learning community.
Now, I know some of you will find this very difficult to believe, but unlike Bishop Pete, I'm becoming increasingly an old and cynical bishop. And some of you will well know my aversion to long meetings. And also, why are we discussing this now? Because I seem to have been having this same discussion for the past 35 years. And so it came as a bit of a surprise to me to find that I was actually part of a group going to Birmingham addressing this Setting God's People Free agenda. But I have to say it's been a real joy and pleasure to do so, because it seems to me that for once in the 35 years of my ministry, the national church is taking this very seriously, and we as a diocese are certainly going to be taking it very seriously indeed. The publication of Setting God's People Free was an attempt by the Archbishop's Council to establish several learning communities to draw up action plans in dioceses, including our own. And as I've just alluded to, a team of us went from the diocese to Birmingham as part of that process, and the process itself will run between May 2018 and May 2019. So some things are still clearly emerging from that and will continue to emerge as we are part of this learning community. But one of the interesting things about the learning community we went to in May was the fact that we were learning from other dioceses, because they too are wrestling with exactly the same question, but also there was a sharing of good practice. And one of the things I want to encourage us to do is to be bold and brave, because this should be a natural part of our discipleship. And one of the things that I've been involved with a lot, and which should be part of this, I've been involved with the business communities. And when I visit various businesses around the diocese, what is quite clear is that there are lots of Christians working in those places, but who don't quite have the confidence to live out their Christian life in that community, or to be able to express their Christian faith. And so part of what we're hoping to do is that we'll be able to equip people for ministry and mission where they are, not just in a church on a Sunday, but in every aspect of their lives. So the aim of this Setting God's People Free is to equip the whole people of God to follow and serve Jesus confidently in every place. And as part of the process of doing that, we will rebalance our investment, not only in lay ministries in relation to ordained ministry, but in lay ministries which are exercised when the people of God are dispersed in both unauthorized and unlicensed ministries, as well as in lay ministries. So I, for one, have had to put my aversion aside to long meetings, the cynical bit of me that says we've been discussing this for too long already, and feel we're involved now in a very exciting initiative which will in turn bear much fruit.
So obviously it's going to take us a little bit of time as we work through with these other dioceses our action plan to know quite what this is going to mean for us, because at the moment, though it sounds like a great idea, you kind of think, well, how do we do that? Some of the ways we're going to be doing that is by developing resources that are going to be available through St. Peter's College. And it was fascinating for me, having been one of the people who's starting that initiative in the diocese, to see how other dioceses are really keen to find out what we're doing, because they realise we're just slightly ahead of the game there. So we want to really invest in St. Peter's and make it into something enormously useful for the diocese. Other things that we wish to review is how we recruit and deploy our self-supporting clergy, and to make most effective use of them as well. So there's lots that we're thinking about in this area, and certainly I'd be delighted to hear any ideas people might have. Please send them to me at my email address. But some of you, I'm doing a consultation process at the moment around the diocese with various people to talk to them about what they think the sort of lay people that we might be needing in the church, and how we're going to train those lay people appropriately and release them into ministries, all sorts of different ministries, being aware of the breadth and diversity that there is out there.
Mark Cockayne is going to come and speak first of all about the continuing work of not least the Centenary project in helping us to address the age demographic, and then Heidi and I together will talk about resourcing churches, resource churches, and church planting as a strategy to address the imbalance in the institutional age of the diocese. Mark.
So, as Bishop Peets just said, the next section of this paper is Rejuvenated, which again is split into two sections. And the first section recognises that the age demographic of our church members is not healthy, with an over-dependence on older people. Quite simply, we need to start recruiting younger people as church members and as leaders, lay and ordained. The paper sets out the challenges on pages 5 to 6, and so only about 1.3% 1.3% of the population of our diocese is in attendance at worship in the Church of England parish on a typical Sunday. But if we break that 1.3% down, we'll also see huge disparities across the age range. So in the older brackets, 65 to 75, that's as many as 3%. 2% would be over 85, but once you get to the 12 to 17-year-olds, it drops to 1%, and in the 18 to 24 bracket, it's only 0.2%. Ask yourself, when did you start serving in your local church? I was a relative latecomer to becoming a Christian, but I still started serving in my local church by the age of the late 20s with many of my friends. In most of our churches today, those serving and leading are more likely to be in their 50s or 60s, even 70s or 80s, and are increasingly getting tired. An often quoted statistic around at the moment is that in our diocese, a 71-year-old is 13 times more likely to attend one of our churches than an 18-year-old. We have to do something about this. If we don't, if that trend continues, logically we will just wither and die, with more and more responsibility falling on older and older people. And as these are also our most committed givers, as they die, so will our income source. It's a perfect cycle of decline, and we have to reverse it into a cycle of growth. And the challenge in this paper is to take the next 7 years as a God-given opportunity to do that. Let me immediately identify the elephant in the room and some of the kickback that we've received during the consultations that we've been doing. We are not, please hear this, we are not saying that we are abandoning or undervaluing our most faithful and older church members. They will continue to be an essential part in serving and helping to bring about this vision. We are committed as a diocese to developing a mixed economy of church, with existing inherited church alongside new fresh expressions of church, with all growing. We want to see growth in all ages, from the youngest to the oldest, from traditional churches to new churches. And there is some good news. Much of the work that we've been doing over the past 5 or 6 years, building this mixed economy and doing our mission action planning together for growth, appears to be bearing fruit. In 2017, for the first time in 10 years, our mission stats show small growth in both our usual Sunday attendance and our worshipping community, which includes midweek services and fresh expressions. But this is against the backdrop of year-on-year decline. But it does give us hope that that decline has been arrested and we are starting to move in the right direction. But we cannot become complacent. So what are we proposing to build on this? Well, the paper highlights on page 12 the opportunities to engage much more with our schools and our universities, to build on our fruitful centenary project, to develop greater collaboration working with our large West Sheffield churches, and the need to recruit younger lay and ordained leaders. And again, we have already made a start in some of this. Some encouragements, fresh expressions help to grow the church younger, because things like messy church and new forms of worship tend to appeal to a younger demographic. So, for example, in Doncaster Archdeaconry, in 2010, 11 parishes recorded 120 adults and 100 children who don't normally attend Sunday worship attending Fresh Expressions. By 2017, that had more than doubled, with 22 Fresh Expressions and 400 adults regularly attending and 300 children. That's growing a sizable, large church. New congregations also help to grow younger leaders, like our authorised lay pioneers. A good example would be Miriam Kavanagh at Bramall Lane, who's working with children as a lay pioneer. The Centenary Project and Shine, which is an evangelistic school ministry birthed from St Thomas Crooks, have partnered together to form a pathway for secondary school-aged children to hear about Jesus and then connect with their local church. So at one such event recently in Rossington, 700 pupils engaged through school assemblies, which was then followed up by a live music event at a local church with unchurched teenagers. 50 turned up and 7 made first-time decisions to become Christians. And we're seeing amazing results from the Centenary Project, where the diocese invested £1 million from our reserves to fund children, family, schools and youth work in our poorer parishes across the diocese, who could not have been able to afford that without that support. And on the back of the results of that project, the Central Church has awarded us another £1.8 million of strategic development funds to double the size of that project over the next 5 years. We already have Centenary Project workers in 42 churches across the diocese, and where they're working, we're seeing a step change in youth and children's work, with much greater engagement with local schools, with things like Christian unions and after-school clubs. There are scores of new expressions of ministry, and between January and March this year alone, we have reached over 500 new children and youth. So, for example, at Swindon, there's a new Messy Church, which is bringing in many new families in an afternoon service. At Finningley, they've started a 3:30 Cafe Church, which meets monthly and is attracting new families, on average 50 people attending on each occasion. Crossways Mission Partnership in Doncaster recently had 10 youth baptised or confirmed as a result of this work. And not only is this growing the church younger, but it's also raising up new leaders. So in many places, these young people, as they are discipled, they start to take on leadership roles in the church, in junior church or messy churches. In one Centenary Project, one of those young people have gone from being a member of an unchurched youth group to now becoming a member of the PCC. And we're also about to launch a Centenary Project intern scheme to grow future CPWs. I think you get the idea. Grow younger, grow mixed economy, grow across all age ranges, but rejuvenate. The targets for this particular part of the Rejuvenate strand are set out on page 14. To engage and bring onto a discipleship pathway an additional 2,500 children by 2025 through the Centenary Project. To establish 25 new congregations based in our church schools by working in partnership with the Board of Education. To ensure that by 2025, at least 10% of our leaders, licensed and clergy, are under 40. So rejuvenate and grow the church younger.
We have in West Sheffield 3 churches which have a good track record over recent years of partnering with the diocese to plant a new congregation or to refresh an existing congregation. I'm thinking of Christchurch Fulwood in its partnering with the diocese over the BMO at Christchurch Endcliffe, Holy Cross in Gleadless Valley, and in a slightly different way, St Mary's in Wheatley. I'm thinking of All Saints Ecclesall in its historic connection with St Peter's Green Hill and in a conversation that is very much current about Greystones Parish. And I'm thinking of St Thomas Philadelphia in establishing Dan Brown with a support team at Wadsley. I also know that the congregation at St Thomas Crooks would be very glad to enter into a conversation with the diocese about partnering with a view to church planting. Can I say loud and clear that I regard these large, flourishing churches in West Sheffield as an asset and a gift to the diocese and not a problem. There is, however, a problem. The problem is one of perception. Those 4 churches might create the impression that to be a resourcing church, it is necessary to be very large, very wealthy, and very evangelical. And it is not so. In the strategic plan, you will see a commitment to establish 10 resourcing churches. If we're successful in that, I fully expect them to be across the length and breadth, not only of the geography of the diocese, but also of its theological traditions. I will take responsibility for ensuring that diversification of the resourcing church portfolio. So actually, I would be very pleased to receive expressions of interest from congregations which think, do you know what, we may only have 100 people, but we would give 10 away if it would bring new life to a neighbouring place. I've, in the paper, I hope, been fairly explicit about the way I understand resourcing churches. There's a little glossary at the end of the paper. You don't have to be a big church to be a resourcing church. You just have to have giving away in your DNA. You need that kind of missionary energy and sense of adventure. I would be very pleased to receive expressions of interest from congregations which would not describe themselves as evangelical. That would be great. You don't have to be evangelical to be missionary in your DNA, and I would be very pleased to begin conversations with others around the diocese about resourcing new church plants. I had a conversation with Bishop Rick Thorpe, the Bishop of Islington. He's, if you like, the Bishop for Church Planting in the Diocese of London, in which he said to me, the smallest resourcing church I can imagine would have 4 people in it. 2 would go to be the plant, and 2 would stay behind to sustain the mother church. He was exaggerating, but it's a point well made. Now, partly to get us out of West Sheffield and partly to begin the diversification of church tradition in our resourcing churches, we're putting together an SDF bid. Heidi.
So in my 5 minutes, I'd really like everybody to leave today fully understanding how SDF works and how important it is, essential to the way that we are funding transformational change in the diocese. Many of you have heard and have been involved with the Centenary Project and the work that that's brought and joy that that brings to the diocese. But our journey with SDF started in 2014 when we started work on mission partnership development projects to try and bring really supportive administrative help into difficult, challenging deprived areas to help build a team around transformational growth. I really love a show of hands for those who are working currently with our mission partnership development workers in the room. Really important part of our journey. Next part of our journey, alongside our ambition to grow younger and rejuvenate, is the way that we really see the importance of team in the diocese, how essential it has been for some of our most deprived areas to have the support of a clergy a music specialist perhaps, a children's worker, a families worker, or administrative support. And we've been testing different models, again funded by the National Church, to try and see how bringing together a team of people will make turnaround better and faster. And the experience that we've had in Wheatley and the use of interim ministry to help us really understand what's happening on the ground have been transformational. So building on all of those exciting things, we've put together a new bid to the strategic development funding process. It's a two-stage process. We've, on the 27th of April, put a bid into the National Church for £3.2 million over the next 6 years to transform the way we develop resource churches. In particular, we focused on the geographical spread within the diocese. So as we've talked a lot about South West Sheffield, in fact Sheffield in particular, that means we've got to focus much more on the more geographical spectrum. So we're looking at the work we need to do towards Goole and the Marshland area. We need to look at the work we're doing in Wath and the Dearne Valley. We need to think about what we're doing in Rotherham alongside Sheffield. The work that we're trying to establish here is how can we secure funding from the National Church to build a team to develop change. The first stage of the bid is an expression of interest stage, and that will go to what's called the Strategic Investment Board in the Church Commissioners on the 21st of June. And we're saying how we would like to develop resource churches in 3 new areas, very deprived and challenging areas that could use a real investment and boost. In particular, we're looking to develop a team that would encompass children's centenary type worker, an administrative worker, where there are building requirements. Can we get investment in funding for a building support function and a fundraising function? So by bringing all of these key skills together, are we better able to create a team that will enable transformational change in these areas? So what I need you all to do is understand that we've got lots to learn. Once we've got through this first stage, we will be invited, we hope, either in June for a timetable towards the autumn to prepare what would be called an implementation plan, setting out exactly how we get from where we are today with these great ideas, building on what we've learned so far, to a new way of delivering resource churches. So I really need you to pray for the process that we're going through to take us successfully through stage 1 of this process. And we're just about to embark on a series of conversations with areas where we think these kinds of resource churches would make a difference, to help us understand how, with that kind of level of investment for transformational change, how you can help us to get the best implementation possible, learning from everything that we know so far with a team-based approach to transform how we are working. Now, once we've got those resource base set up, then we kick into the resource planting agenda where, next time they get a curate, that curate can come and then take with it a planting and energising and transformational change agenda to a neighbouring parish, to a neighbouring place where they are desperately in need of a messy church or a new expression of church in a different environment, for example, a care home. So real opportunity here to get a real kernel of an idea developed, established and learnt from, so that when we set out, as in the strategy, on the agenda to get a resourcing church in every part of our geographical spread, in every deanery, with new congregations, we really understand what model needs to be up there and working effectively. And then the benefit of the whole of the SDF programme is if we can get it right in Sheffield, we can then share that with all of the other 41 dioceses, so that we're not reinventing the wheel and we're using the money that we get centrally to really transform the whole of our country, and our mission and growth happens because we've learnt it here first and we've shared our lessons. So things like evaluation become a really central part of that, making sure we understand what we did, how we did it, how we would replicate the work that we're doing. So continue with your prayers if you have started already. I don't mind if you do that up between 20 and 25 past the hour, any day, any time, but we need your support to see if we can take this bid to the next stage. We will, as I said, know sometime after the 21st of June, and hopefully use it as an opportunity to really kickstart a transformational journey for us all in resource churches. Thank you.
And so to finish with, I just want to take you back to the renewed section, the very first section of the strategy, to the last 3 words under the bullet point that you'll see there: to seek the renewing power of God's Spirit for the diocese, praying for 2.5%. And I just want to finish by elaborating on that 2.5%. And I really would like a steer from you, whether you think this is a helpful addition to the strategy or not. So I will be looking particularly for a cluster of ticks and exclamation marks or crosses and question marks on your blue papers when I collect them in and look at them. Here is a slide that Mark Cockayne was referring to a moment ago. It shows data for 2016. It's already 2 years out of date, but I don't think the graph bars or lines will have moved very much. In 2016, on any given Sunday, about 1.3% of the population of South Yorkshire and the part of the East Riding, which is in our diocese, could be found in a Church of England church. That means that 98.7% were not, and I can assure you that most of them were not to be found in churches of other Christian traditions. What would it be like if that black dotted bar down the centre of the graph at 1.3% had shifted far enough to the right by 2025 to say 2.5%? Because I would be prepared to commit to that. I would be prepared to commit to pray on a daily basis for 2.5%. And I just want to know if you would find that, or you think our people would find that a helpful sort of a thing. Or think of it like this. There's the Diocese of Sheffield, coloured yellow, green and red. The green areas are the parishes in which 2% of the parish population are typically to be found in one of our churches, in that parish church on any given Sunday. Yellow means between 1 and 2%. Red means less than 1%. There is no correlation that I can see between the quality of the ordained ministry and the colour that you're looking at. The most obvious correlation, I'm sorry to tell you, is socio-economic. The green are the richest, wealthiest, most prosperous bits of our diocese. The reds are the most deprived parts of our diocese. So if you're looking at your parish and it's red, could you please bat away that little voice of guilt that says I must be failing? This pattern is replicated right across the Church of England in every diocese. The Church of England is currently prospering most in our most prosperous parishes and struggling most in our most deprived parishes. But what if we prayed that God would turn the map green? That's only 2%, sisters and brothers, but 2% right across the diocese. My goodness, what a difference that would make. Of course, if we prayed for 2% and God blessed our ministry so that in 2025 we found ourselves looking at slides that were monochrome green, we would set a new strategy to land in 2030 in which we'd lift the bar to 5%. We would make 2% the new zero and dial all the parishes red again and start over. Because even 5%, sisters and brothers, would mean that 95% of the people in our parishes were not worshipping with us regularly on a Sunday. Could you please return to your blue bits of paper and help me? Would you like to see included in this strategy a commitment to pray for 2.5% by 2025. Thank you.